In America, like many parts of the world, there was a lack of knowledge and information, even geographically, not to mention politically, about where Yugoslavia was even. And certainly Croatia, Bosnia, Kosovo, most Americans, including members of Congress, had no idea of the location, much less the issues involved. So we had a great educational job to do to pinpoint where this repression was taking place. And our strategy was to turn up the volume in terms of the attention and to increase the velocity of the flow of information. So we set up a rather, in those days, sophisticated apparatus for gathering news from the front, from what was happening in Croatia and Bosnia, and then putting it into a format that could be understood by Americans. And usually that meant very succinct statements, not long dissertations about what was happening, but an up-to-date, daily, in many cases, brief on what was happening over there.
I was writing the press guidance for the State Department's spokeswoman, Margaret Tutwiler, confidant of James Baker, Secretary of State. And Margaret Tutwiler was interested in being a little more active than the senior officers who were trying to handle the issue. So between what I would write and what she would say, there was always a moment when senior officers could remove what I had written or not. Okay. Well, one morning I had a conversation with my counterpart at the American Embassy in Belgrade, and he explained to me that the Serbs were continuing their ethnic cleansing, quote unquote. I thought, well, what a marvelous expression, ethnic cleansing. So I put that in the guidance, and to my surprise, due to circumstances, whatever, nobody managed to take it out. So Margaret Tutwiler used the term ethnic cleansing. If you go back and look, I think it was sometime in May of '92 when she first used the term ethnic cleansing. And the term had been used in Yugoslavia before that time, but not really here in the United States. Well, of course, when she said ethnic cleansing, red flags went up, press went up. What is ethnic cleansing? This sounds very ominous, very much like World War II.
The use of this word, you were responsible for it. Yeah. You introduced it.
Yeah, that's my contribution to history.
Immediately, it was the Serbs only who were accused of doing
right.
this.
Right, that's right.
Why was that?
That is a very difficult question. The first reason why has to do with the sort of the original sin of American policy, which was to have recognized Bosnia as an independent entity. And once we did that, those groups in Bosnia that objected to Bosnia being ruled by Muslims were the bad guys in a sense. But there's more to it than that. The Serbs were uncooperative in the U.S. efforts to, at the margins, deal with the problem. And gradually, as the crisis unfolded, the Serbs were not only not cooperative with the United States, the Serbs were singularly indifferent to the media. They really didn't like the media. So it was easier, in a sense, for people to begin to fall into the idea that there was just one good side and one bad side. So at many different levels, there's an element of groupthink. Everybody's going along, saying the same thing, believing the same thing, and they were all wrong.
And during the summer of '92, it was a critical turning point, as one looks back now, 10 years later, a critical turning point in galvanizing world opinion. And Newsweek magazine had a front page story about the concentration camps. And when this hit America, all of a sudden, there was awareness, much greater awareness than before. And it all began to add up. This is incremental I guess that's the way education is and information. It was incremental, but yet people could begin, particularly members of Congress, on the foreign policy committees of Congress, and in the State Department, and foreign policy think tanks in Washington, and journalists covering foreign policy, international issues. They were becoming aware of what was going on. And that issue, no question about it. Again, we live in a visual world. The graphics on ITN and on Newsweek are indelibly etched into our minds. I'll never forget that front page of Newsweek and this emaciated man standing behind the barbed wire. Graphic images that, again, were not developed by some public relations firm. These were journalists on the scene reporting the facts. Our job was then to make sure, I hear again, turning up the volume of the lossy, have you seen it? Have you seen it?
I remember very vividly being in the State Department building when the first pictures showed up on ITN and people were running from room to room looking at television. Oh my God, it can't possibly be true, and so on. But we developed a series of responses that later gradually evolved into all the policy that we had. The UN mission, the War Crimes Tribunal, everything sort of flowed out of that moment. In fact, if that photograph had never appeared, I think it's debatable whether U.S. policy would have ever become active.
There were people who said that these images had been fabricated because of the barbed wire really wasn't there. So it was fabricated by the ITN crew.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is, yeah. And sometimes, you know, mistakes can happen too. People can be misidentified as things like that, but you know, I think that there's no evidence of that whatsoever that I'm aware of. And again, you know, nobody's perfect and mistakes are made sometimes intentionally, but again, look at the whole picture and it's just so clear, you know. So you now have Milosevic sitting in The Hague, and the preponderance of evidence is just so incontrovertible that what we felt at that time, 10 years ago, has certainly been justified and substantiated and documented by what's happening in The Hague.